Hey, come on in and spend some time with the film hobbyist. My name is Lydia, and I love movies. We're sitting here in my attic room. The walls are bare, painted antique white. Most of this space is used for storage, boxes of old papers we should have sorted through years ago and moved with instead. But this nook, it belongs to me. I'm not much of a decorator, but I have a few pieces of art on the walls. Behind me are a couple of prints. One is an illustration of the Fellowship of the Ring arriving in Lothlorien, all in glowing blues and silvers. The other is a piece done by a friend of mine. It's a watercolor in the style of a Victorian fairy painting. A female figure, the embodiment of night, crowned with stars, holding the moon, gliding over a brightly lit A-frame house. If you turn around a little, you can see the painting above you. At first glance, it looks like a sunset behind a mountain. But if you look closer, you'll realize it's actually a picture of a wildfire all along a ridge, little blazes reflecting in the street below. It's based on a picture a friend of mine took from her street of the mountains near where I grew up. I did it in high school, so the quality isn't awesome, but I'm pretty proud of it. The things we put on our walls do say something about us, about what we love or who we are or who we want to be. Even mass-produced canvas prints bought at Target say something. Hotel art, too. It can be as simple as, this space needs to be filled with some sort of color and pattern so you forget it's a tiny box. Or it could just be, isn't that pretty to look at? Today, we're talking about an absolutely iconic movie poster movie. 1961's Breakfast at Tiffany's, directed by Blake Edwards. You may not have seen this movie, which is fine, but I guarantee you've encountered it, either because you've heard the eponymous song by Deep Blue Something while shopping at the hardware store, which actually has very little to do with the movie, or because you've seen its most iconic image, Audrey Hepburn as Holly Golightly in a slinky black, sleeveless, cocktail-length dress with exaggerated hips and a neckline made out of costume jewelry, big, chunky rhinestones draped across her collarbones. Her hair is swept into a curving updo embedded with a tiny tiara. She's accompanied by different accessories, depending on the image: long black gloves, large, round, black sunglasses, an absurdly long cigarette holder, and an orange tabby cat perched on her shoulders. You may have seen a picture of Hepburn herself staring down the camera, or perhaps her looking to the side, cigarette holder dangling out of her mouth at a diagonal. Or illustrated, her arm raised above her head in a performative gesture. Or maybe you've seen some other drawing mass-produced on a tote bag or a t-shirt. I don't know what girls' college dorm rooms are like today, but this character was everywhere when I was in college, around 15 years ago. It captured the spirit of the current aesthetic trends: glam, peplum, costume jewelry, a little bump in your hair, large bug-eyed sunglasses. And it was this image of sophistication, of what life could be. If you knew a little more of the context of the image, it meant free-spiritedness. Maybe you knew the song Moon River from the film, about chasing rainbows with a fellow wild thing, accompanied by Audrey on a tiny guitar as a proto-ukulele girl. You could almost picture Zooey Deschanel singing it, or Ingrid Michaelson. I would not be surprised to find out that one of them has covered it. At first glance, Holly Golightly matches the spirit of the young people gentrifying Brooklyn, pursuing their dreams in New York City, wide-eyed and seeking authenticity. So I don't blame people for putting that picture on their walls, for wanting whimsical sophistication and wispy glamour. I do wonder how many of them had actually seen the movie. Now, I want to be upfront. I actually don't like this movie very much. It's okay. It's fine. I don't dislike it. It's just not my kind of thing. If I were to rank it on my personal taste, I'd only give it 2 stars. But I do think this is a movie worth talking about. And I thought it would be good for you to hear me talk about something I don't like, but still think has a good deal of value. With regards to depth, I think this movie has clear and deep themes, interesting ideas it is exploring. And in terms of quality, it's solidly made, with 3 distinct flaws. I'll mention the first here. It's important to talk about before you get into any of the real meat of the story. This film contains one of the most infamous examples of yellowface in film history. Yellowface is when an actor of European descent plays a character of East Asian descent. This usually requires not just yellowish makeup, but face taping and prosthetics, a gross distortion of features. In this movie, Holly's landlord, Mr. Yunioshi, is played by Mickey Rooney, squinting in a terrible black wig and gross false teeth, looking like the disgusting propaganda posters produced during World War II, always bumbling around and shouting, either aggressive or lecherous. It is horrible. It is meant to be comic relief, which is somehow worse. And this isn't just modern sensibilities bumping into old norms. When the film was released in 1961, the reviews in both The Hollywood Reporter and Variety found the character unnecessary and offensive. Producer Richard Shepard later claimed he had wanted an Asian actor for the role, and screenwriter George Axelrod tried to get the scenes with Holly and Yunioshi reshot so they could be easily edited out. But the director and Rooney were good friends and former roommates, so the scene stayed. Which is one reason the movie is harder to access than its images. Now, for those of you who haven't watched the film, or don't have any desire to, especially because of this first flaw, I'll provide a rundown of the movie. Breakfast at Tiffany's is told from the perspective of Paul Varjak, a young writer who has just moved into a new apartment in New York City as he gets to know his airy-fairy, free-spirited, utterly fascinating, and clearly disassociating from some kind of trauma neighbor, Holly Golightly. She makes a living as a sort of freelance escort. She wouldn't call herself a prostitute, but she's definitely in the spectrum of sex work. She also earns $100 a week visiting a gangster in prison and relaying coded messages to his lawyer. She either pretends or is in denial about the messages, calling them mere weather reports. She's attempting to save up money so that she can support her brother Fred, who is currently serving in the military and who, it's implied, is unable to fully take care of himself. Holly takes a shine to Paul because he looks like Fred and because he's financially existing in a similar space as she. He's working on a novel under the sponsorship of an older woman. Basically, he's a sugar baby with a sugar mama. Over the course of several vignettes, we learn Holly's backstory. She's actually from Texas, where she was known as Lula Mae Barnes. She and Fred ran away from a bad foster home and were found stealing food from the farm of a vet named Doc Golightly. He married her when she was 14. According to Holly, the marriage was later annulled. Eventually, she ran away to California, where she tried to become a movie star. Her agent gave her French lessons, which got rid of her accent, and then, just before her first screen test, she ran off for New York. Paul and Holly grow closer. He gives up the novel and is able to sell a short story. They spend a delightfully silly day together, getting a Cracker Jack ring engraved at Tiffany's, Holly's favorite place. And at the end of the day, they sleep together. Paul, convinced he's in love with Holly, breaks things off with his sugar mama, but is surprised to discover that Holly viewed their day as purely transactional. She's preparing to pursue a relationship with a wealthy Brazilian. Before Paul moves out, Holly receives news that her brother Fred has been killed in a Jeep accident. She's devastated. Later, she invites Paul back for a visit, the day before she leaves for Brazil. She believes, or is in denial, that the Brazilian will marry her when they get there. But after she's arrested for her connection with the gangster, the Brazilian abandons her. She decides to go to Brazil anyway. Paul explains that's a terrible idea, as she would be breaking bail if nothing else, and finally comes out and says what he thinks of her. That she isn't a free spirit or a wild thing. She's a coward, a scared little girl who, no matter how far she runs, will always run into herself. And that he loves her. Holly doesn't take any of this well. Paul leaves Holly behind in a cab while he goes to find her cat, which she had abandoned. And Holly decides, after a good cry looking at the Cracker Jack ring from Tiffany's, to come back to be with him and the cat. They kiss. If you can't tell, Breakfast at Tiffany's doesn't actually have much of a plot. It's the kind of story we would call a character study. Every vignette, every adventure is just another way to get to know Holly and how her mind works. Holly's backstory is part of the whole point of the movie, as is her character's journey. Who is this woman, we are meant to ask? And will she ever change? There are some viewers of this movie who argue that Holly is just a manic pixie dream girl, a term that was coined in 2005 that applies to a whole host of female characters popular in films of the late 90s to the early 2010s. Quirky, adorable young women with optimistic perspectives on the world whose narrative function is to fall in love with morose and melancholic young men experiencing a crisis and help them solve their problems. Holly has far too much character focus to be the former, and Paul has too little narrative focus to be the latter. Though I do think we can learn something from the comparison. The current perspective on manic pixie dream girls is that they're all actually just neurodivergent, having some flavor of autism or ADHD that their love interests took for a character quirk, but that was probably a personal struggle. And what I find really interesting is that there's a big overlap between the expressions of ADHD and PTSD. Holly's so forgetful, always losing her keys and struggling to keep track of what day it is. Problems with working memory and executive dysfunction are common with both ADHD and PTSD, as is a general restlessness and a struggle to make and commit to plans. And Holly is definitely struggling with PTSD, including nightmares involving her brother. I think it's also worth noting that exhibiting sexually risky behavior is a very common indicator of sexual abuse, and that seems very likely in Holly's story. As Lula Mae Barnes, Holly ran away from home with her brother and stole food to keep them both alive, marrying Doc Golightly so they could have a place to live. She may have moved across the country, changed her accent, changed her whole vibe, but she is still very much a runaway, using her body to provide for her brother. That never changed. Right now, I do have to bring up what I believe is the second flaw of Breakfast at Tiffany's. Try as I might, I can never really believe that this backstory belongs to Audrey Hepburn. Don't get me wrong, she gives a wonderful performance as Holly. Daffy, in denial, sophisticated and girlish all at once, suppressing a deep well of trauma and pain. But I can't ever believe that she was a country girl from Texas. Truman Capote, who wrote the novella on which the film is based, reportedly wanted Marilyn Monroe, and while the timing for this film wouldn't have worked out with her, both due to her age and life at this point, I definitely agree that a Marilyn type would have made much more sense in this part. Audrey never reads as anything but a transatlantic socialite. A traumatized one, sure, but not a country girl transplant, even when she's drunk. And the idea of Audrey at 14 seeming like full woman marriage material to Doc makes him seem creepier than I think he's meant to be. It stretches credulity in a way that breaks their scene together, which gets in the way of the realities of this character. Hepburn's casting makes Holly look as if she's escaped Texas, but the character never, ever has. The way Doc Golightly tells it, which, yes, is definitely biased, it was Holly's idea for them to get married. By marrying Doc, she made a financially secure way to support Fred, and she didn't have to work, as Doc's daughter from a previous marriage did all the housework. Holly's plan to marry the wealthy Brazilian is the same plan repeated, just with more money at stake. She ran away from Doc like she ran away from her first Texas home, and yet ended up playing the same gambit. The clothes have changed, and the accent, and the trappings, and even her name, but she's still that same girl. When she first meets Paul, she explains that she's often struck by a feeling she calls the mean reds, in contrast to the blues. What she describes sounds very much like crushing anxiety. Her solution is to visit Tiffany's, the jewelry store. Surrounded by all that glamorous wealth, she feels at peace. She explains to Paul that she really is just wandering around searching until she finds a place that gives her that same sense of security she gets from her dreams of glamour. She hasn't even unpacked her boxes or named her cat. Again, that sounds very much like disassociation from trauma. Even her silly day with Paul seems very much like the kind of day a child would enjoy. Let's buy something fancy with the money we have in our pocket. Wouldn't it be silly to make them engrave a Cracker Jack ring? Let's be obnoxious to a librarian and deface a library book by Paul signing his own story collection. Let's steal Halloween masks from a 5 and 10 store. That's part of Holly's appeal. And what you come to realize is what all these men see in her, why they're willing to give her generous tips for their time together. To them, Holly is the escapist fantasy of youth. Become a child again, fool it about, go on an adventure. Paul finds himself taken in by it all and realizes that what felt like real love and connection to him was only just Holly continuing to disassociate, to play a part, to play a game. She's a child fawning her way out of trauma, stunted, not thriving. There's a difference, you see, between being childish and childlike. To be childish is to be stuck as a child, either from immaturity or trauma. You cannot understand the seriousness of the real world because either the world is a game to you or you cannot confront the horrors therein. To be childlike is to know the seriousness of the real world and to choose joy and wonder in spite of it. And Holly cannot bear to face the seriousness of the real world, even as she cannot escape it. What I think is the most stunning scene in this whole film is when she receives the news about her brother's death. Holly, dressed in a bright pink gown, a tall, jeweled pink tiara in her hair, a pink cape tossed over her shoulder, looks like a little girl playing glamorous princess. And after reading the news of her brother's death, she throws a devastating tantrum, screaming, throwing every object in her apartment, shattering glass and china. Paul rushes in and holds her back like a parent holding a child, and she whacks at him with a feather pillow. He gets her to her bed and leaves, and there she remains, curled up in the fetal position in the dark, a broken little girl sobbing on her mattress, feathers swirling over her head. Holly might play dress up, but she cannot run from the real world. Tiffany's is not a solution to trauma. And Paul isn't either. He knows this. He has the maturity to realize he can't fix her. He just needs to move on. Until the ending. Which brings me to my third flaw with this film. The end doesn't work. I don't believe for 1 second that a big speech from Paul, even a direct, honest one, is going to change Holly's mind. The unfortunate truth is that lovely, broken people have to come to the realization of their brokenness on their own. Interventions only work if the person genuinely chooses to let them work. And I don't think Holly's capable of making that choice yet. I sincerely doubt that Paul is the first person who has told Holly the truth about herself in a desperate attempt to save her from self-sabotage. And I don't see an engraved Cracker Jack ring really bringing Holly the peace to be able to go back to Paul and Kat. Even if Holly did stay with Paul for a little while, she'd run away again. Because Holly needs to want to change. And I don't believe she's ready for that yet. Capote didn't. In the original novella, Holly does go to Brazil, and the young writer genuinely hopes that she will find a place that feels like home one day. Also in the original novel, the young writer is heavily implied to be gay, which really couldn't fly in 1961, hence the romance made up whole cloth for this film. Personally, I don't think the romance is bad from a character or thematic perspective. I just don't find Holly's choice to be truthful. Instead, we're left with a strange sort of cognitive dissonance. This film is a critique of escapism, and yet it wants us to escape in the last few minutes, to imagine that Holly could change and that she and Paul will have a happy relationship. It wants us to remember Holly as childlike, not childish, and hold her in our hearts as an aspirational image of whimsical sophistication. But I find that image false. It's a large reason why I don't really like this movie. So, here's my pitch for the ending. Paul gives his speech. He gets out of the cab to go look for Kat. We still see Holly looking sadly at the ring, leading us to wonder if she'll go back after him. And then we cut to Paul finding Kat. He looks back at the street, hoping Holly has returned, but the cab is gone, and he walks off smiling sadly, Cat in his arms as the choir begins to sing Moon River. Then he and Cat could be the two drifters looking for the same rainbow's end, for the hope that one day Holly will change, that she will stop running, that she will find peace, that she will know both safety and contentment and true childlike joy in spite of the real world.